Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Kid Naruto Awakened the Rinnegan Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
How are you feeling? For a split second, narrow violet eyes looked across the clearing at pupilless teal ones. Gaara lowered his gaze for a brief moment, staring at his hand as he turned it back and forth before returning his gaze to the blonde across from him. It's difficult to put into words. Is it always so quiet for you? Naruto only smiled briefly before wincing and clutching his stomach in pain. I'm sure it only appears that way now, but don't worry, you'll get used to it. He chuckled as the redhead yawned and stretched his arms above his head. I feel like I can finally rest for the first time in my life. Naruto stood up, winced, slightly hunched over, clutching his stomach. He walked over to his new friend as quickly as he could, which was not very fast, and gently patted him on the shoulder. You deserve it. Gaara, on the other hand, was watching as the sand armor that had parted at Naruto's touch reformed almost as soon as the blonde moved away. He blinked, a frown forming on his features, and quickly raised an arm, palm outstretched in front of him. As if in response, the ground trembled, sand rising from the floor in a swaying pillar. He let it fall instead of making a kunai before thrusting it towards his arm. Naruto watched with interest as sand sprang up around the redhead, blocking the kunai before it could touch his skin. Gaara let the kunai fall to the ground, staring at his hands in shock and confusion. Naruto took advantage of the opportunity and walked over to the former Suna Genin. I'm not sure what you mean. Should I have lost my ability to traverse the sands without the Ikabai? Naruto raised an eyebrow before reassuringly patting the boy on the back. I assumed they were your own skills. You agreed to it knowing you might lose your abilities. Gaara just nodded, still staring incredulously at his hands. Suddenly, he looked up, his eyes slightly desperate. Come at me. Naruto simply tilted his head before standing up and reaching for his shakuju, which was resting against a nearby tree. He spun the wooden staff once with one solid swing before attempting to crack it against the boy's arm. Surprisingly, sand rose up once more, blocking the thrust like a steel wall before it could hit. I have no idea what is still keeping me safe. What causes the sand to move? Naruto sat back down, resting his staff against his shoulder so he could place his hand on his stomach once more, with a small unhelpful shrug. I guess you'll have to figure that out for yourself. Gaara nodded absently once more, continuing to test his obviously retained powers with various sand weapons. It had taken nearly all night to safely extract Gaara's Biju. Naruto had assumed it would be similar to Sora's procedure, but he had overlooked Shukaku's consciousness. The great tanuki didn't seem to like being separated from its host, so it fought back. Furthermore, because it was a full Biju, it took much longer than simply sealing a portion of the Kyubai's leftover chakra. But Naruto was feeling the after-effects. An intense pain was coursing through his body, as if someone had replaced his blood with acid. It was centered on his stomach, so he assumed it was all the chakra he had absorbed. Despite the fact that his body had grown accustomed to the Biju chakra due to the slow leakage from the Kyubai's seal, it was still an entire Biju's worth, which was no small amount. Naruto was putting on a brave face for Gaara right now, but his Preta path was working overtime to either integrate the new foreign chakra or push it into the seal. We need to check to see if there is any residual chakra in your system. Once again, he received only an absent nod, as if Gaara's neck was on autopilot. Shrugging, Naruto closed his eyes and placed his hand on Gaara's chest, feeling out the former Jinchuriki's chakra. He frowned as he felt something there. He was certain it wasn't a remnant of Shukaku. It was almost as if someone had laced Gaara's chakra with their own. He could feel it acting independently of his usual chakra system while moving in perfect sync with his body. It must have occurred at a very young age for the two to be so well integrated, and it must have come from someone with a very similar chakra, such as a family member. This sparked an idea in Naruto. Did you know your mother, Gaara? The redhead finally looked up, jerked out of his trance, and realized Naruto had his hand against his skin. She died the day I was born. Complications from the Ikabai being sealed within me, I was told. Naruto smiled at him, which confused the poor redhead. So she gave her life so that you could have yours. I can't think of a more genuine expression of love. Gaara's face darkened, his hair briefly covering his eyes. My uncle told me that my mother despised me from the moment she saw me, referring to me as a feeble and weak child. That was shortly before he attempted to murder me on my father's orders. Naruto knelt beside the former vessel, a warm hand on his shoulder and a warm smile across his features. Perhaps you should refuse to believe them. I believe your mother's spirit lives on in the sand, guarding you. Gaara looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. However, one look at Naruto's kindly and confident gleam and his own meek smile began to spread across his features. You've done so much for me, Naruto, and I'm still not sure why. With a new feeling welling up in his chest, he looked away, staring into the forest that surrounded the duo. However, I've decided that I want to understand. He turned around, his small developing smile still visible across his lips. Thank you very much. Naruto gladly accepted it before wincing slightly and chuckling slightly strainedly. What are you going to do now? I could always use a companion on my travels. I can't promise comfort or security, but I can at least offer companionship. The redhead's smile grew slightly in response to his response. I think I'd like that, but I'll have to pass. Naruto simply nodded, shifting his staff to his other hand before extending the appendage towards the ex-Jinchuriki. Then, Gaara no Sabaku, I wish you luck as you forge your own path in the world. Gaara only looked down at the extended hand for a fraction of a second before firmly grasping it in his own, the sand from the contact falling to the ground at their feet. And the same goes for you, Naruto Uzumaki. In comparison to the desert's scorching heat, a warm sunny day in Kawa no Kuni was incredibly relaxing for the walking monk. As he drove down a long, winding road, the trees around him reminded him of his home at the temple, and he smiled contentedly. The sky above him was blue, with not a cloud in sight. On days like this, all the monks would be outside, either meditating or socializing with friends. So he was perplexed when the skies opened up and a deluge of water began to fall from the sky. He looked up, blinking away the droplets of water that tried to enter his eyes, and the sky was completely clouded over. The blonde shrugged it off as one of those strange occurrences and moved on, pulling the hood of his robes up to keep the worst of it at bay. What he couldn't ignore was when it abruptly stopped, not lightening or easing up, just stop. When he looked up again, all he saw was clear blue sky and the occasional lazy white cloud, none of which appeared heavy enough to rain. The whole thing took about 5 minutes and threw the poor blonde for a loop. He had never seen such crazy weather before. Again, he almost passed it off as the local weather, but he had a nagging feeling something was wrong. He'd driven through river country on his way to Suna, which had never happened before. He pulled over in a clearing not far from the side of the road and quickly built a fire to dry his clothes. While he waited, he assumed his standard sitting posture before allowing his mind to drift away deep into his own consciousness. That doesn't sound good. When Naruto entered the seal, he was no longer in the Kyuubi's cell room, but rather in the corridors. He did, however, notice a difference. A new pipe adorned the roof, larger than the pipes he assumed represented his chakra but smaller than the pipe reserved for the Kyuubi. The ground beneath his feet was soaked, most likely due to the poor condition of the new pipe, which was cracked and leaking. Naruto could see the Ikubi's chakra, like the Kyuubi's chakra, eat away at the corridor floor. It was leaking out at a slower rate, no doubt due to the decreased potency, but there was definitely more of it leaking out into his system. That couldn't be good, according to the blonde. He quickly concentrated all of his attention on his Preta path. The results were immediate. Some of the cracks sealed themselves and the leaking decreased. However, doing so was difficult, and Naruto was visibly straining to do so. However, his will was absolute, and he lessened the damage to the point where the corridor could begin to recover from the damage. The monk moved through the seal's representative passages as quickly as he could while maintaining his concentration. Once he knew what he was looking for, it was much easier to find the Kyuubi's room, and he was soon staring up at the massive barred gate. The pipes weren't the only thing that had changed. The room had grown larger. Instead of being a square, it was now a pentagon, and 2 of the massive walls had been taken up by equally massive gates. The Kyuubi appeared to be in its usual location deep within the darkness of its own personal cell, while the other, no, I was nearly free. YERRRGGHHH. Naruto stood there watching as an enormous tanuki, similar in size to the Kyuubi but slightly smaller, raged against the bars of its cage. In an attempt to break free, it would slam its tail, arms, and even its head against the unyielding metal bars. All the while, it cursed and screamed hysterically, to the point where even the Kyuubi's eye twitched in irritation. The sudden silence as Naruto entered the room, on the other hand, was equally deafening. Phew. The sand construction slammed both hands against the bars at the same time, its black and yellow eyes fixed on the small figure before it. "Father, father, father, it's your father." It continued to repeat that in increasingly hysterical tones, banging against the bars at various points. "Silence, you useless tanuki." The massive mass of sand came to a halt, frozen in place as if each individual particle of sand had been replaced by ice. It slowly turned its colossal head, red eyes meeting yellow, to stare at the fox. There was a brief moment of tense silence before Shukaku burst out laughing, loud and high-pitched, bouncing on its feet like a gleeful child. "Yes, yes, yes, that's it. The mighty nine-tailed fox has been imprisoned in an itty-bitty cage. You're no longer so powerful, fuzzball." Shukaku burst into tears once more as the Kyuubi growled in frustration, unable to do anything because of the bars between them. Naruto stood there, unsure whether to be amused or confused. In the end, he settled on both. However, as he shifted, his shakuju jingled again, and he discovered Shukaku's full attention on him. Father has returned." The colossal tanuki crept up to the cage, pressing its massive head against the bars to get a better look at Naruto. "Shukaku predicted your return, but the others didn't believe him. But you've arrived. You're actually here." Naruto looked perplexed as the sand construct pressed its forehead against the bars for a brief moment. It backed away after a moment, looking up at Naruto with expectant eyes. Naruto had seen the same look in the eyes of a dog waiting for food. Shukaku returned to his original position, his forehead pressed against the bars, almost as soon as they made eye contact. Naruto cast a sidelong glance at the Kyuubi, who was staring at the whole thing with disdain. Unsure what to do, Naruto moved cautiously over to Ikebi's cell as the great creature continued to look up with excitement and expectancy. Finally, he was standing right in front of it, peering over the vast sand plain of the Biju's brow. After a brief hesitation, he reached through the bars with one hand and gently rubbed Shukaku's sandy head. "I missed you, father." Naruto had never considered what it would sound like to hear a sand tanuki the size of a building sigh happily. He found out in that moment. After a few moments, it appeared that the Ikebi had fallen asleep, and when Naruto moved away, the creature's chest rose and fell steadily, a contented grin on its usually crazed features. The blonde walked into the center of the room, looking at the Kyuubi, who gave him a single red eye. "Can you tell me what that was about?" The fox only huffed once before resting its head back on its paws and rubbing its paw over its ear. "Why does he keep referring to me as his father?" The fox didn't respond, even though Naruto could tell he was sleeping, and instead just lay there. "You know, I could just ask Shukaku when it wakes up and avoid dealing with you." Finally, the Kyuubi reacted, snorting loudly in what appeared to be amusement but was most likely contempt. "You'd have a better chance of getting a straight answer from that insane tanuki ninja if you tried to hollow out the earth." Finally, the creature raised its head slightly, staring at Naruto with unblinking red eyes. And, for the record, Shukaku has somehow convinced himself, pitiful little insane mind and all, that you are the sage. Naruto blinked at the information as he absently shifted his shakuju to his other hand, the action eliciting another twitch from the Kyuubi's ears that escaped his notice. "Does it regard the Sage of the Six Paths as his father?" Before the Kyuubi lowered its head again, his only response was a single irritated growl. Knowing when his tenant would be unresponsive, Naruto simply sighed and vanished from the seal. Naruto looked down at himself, surprised to discover that his clothes had dried in the time he had spent in the seal. He stood up and extinguished the fire before returning to the path to continue his journey. He came across a small out-of-the-way village with a makeshift wooden wall surrounding it after only 10 minutes of walking. It appeared that barricades and other fortifications had been hurriedly erected, and that the wall had been smashed in many places, with large holes slowly filled in by laboring villagers. Naruto could feel the heavy presence of depression and general hopelessness weighing down on the people as he walked further into the village. People out in the streets huddled beneath blankets, probably wearing everything they owned, were all around him. Children ran through alleyways to the street's edge, their clothes tattered and their limbs skinny from malnourishment. He looked down when he felt a tug on the hem of his robes. Looking down, he saw a young girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, staring up at him with large chocolate eyes. "Do you happen to have any food?" Naruto was in disbelief about what he was seeing, but he managed a small strained smile as he reached into a pouch and retrieved a scroll. He gave the young girl a loaf of bread with a puff of smoke, which she just stared at as if it would disintegrate with a touch. Naruto gently pressed it into her hands and lightly patted her on the shoulder. Tears streamed from the corners of her eyes as she wrapped her little arms as tightly as she could around Naruto's waist. "Many thanks, sir." She dashed off towards a small group of kids her age and began to distribute the bread she had been given. She came to a halt, however, when she felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Naruto looking down at their small group. Please let me. With that, he continued to unseal the food he had gotten from stocking up in Suna, and soon each of the kids had a handful of food in their hands and were all staring up at him with wide eyes. Naruto began his journey through the small rundown village after extricating himself from the enormous group glomp he had found himself in. That was very thoughtful of you, young man. When he looked for the voice, he saw an old woman sitting against the side of a building, looking up at him. Her hair was graying and unkempt, and her skin was riddled with deep wrinkles, but her eyes still sparkled as brightly as anyone else's. I'm sure some of those kids haven't eaten in a few days. Naruto approached the woman, his shakuju clicking against the cobblestones. What exactly is going on in this village? What exactly happened here? The elderly woman just sighed and looked up, as if it was going to rain money and food any minute. We used to be a bustling lumber town, with many merchants passing through on their way between Hai no Kuni and Kei's no Kuni. However, the Wind Daimyo decided to construct a highway through the country to make his journeys shorter. Our small village had been completely bypassed and was no longer an important stop. Everyone's business suffered, and we soon ran out of money to fund a proper militia or defense. Then, of course, bandits appeared. They swooped down on us like a carrion bird picking at a dying animal, destroying the town, robbing everyone, and even kidnapping many of the younger women from their families. Naruto's hand tightened around his staff as the woman spoke, his knuckles turning white. When was the last time they came through here? The woman kneaded her hands restlessly in the blanket that had been thrown over her body. They took off east today, just a few hours ago, with a few girls from the village. Her voice was dejected and defeated. It was clear to Naruto that she, like the rest of the village, had given up a long time ago. He started to walk away when he felt a hand grab his robes for the second time. The old woman's eyes were sad. You don't intend to go after them, do you? Naruto said nothing and simply stared for a moment before turning and walking away. His feet carried him through the village faster than usual. Something about the village's air of utter hopelessness struck a nerve deep within him. Before he knew it, he was walking east at a brisk pace, skirting around trees, unsure of what he was doing. Part of him considered going after the bandits, while another wondered how he would even find them. More importantly, he had no idea what he would do when he finally reached them, assuming he did. Soon after, it began to rain, and Naruto quickly raised his hood, pulling his scarf up and around his mouth to cover his whisker marks. As he continued to walk forward at a steady pace, the wind picked up a little, causing his cloak to flap around his body. Surprisingly, it was the noise that led Naruto to the bandits before his eyes even caught a glimpse of chakra. Even above the increasingly intense rain, the raucous sounds of laughing, fighting, and drunken singing reached his ears. It wasn't long after that he found himself standing on a small ridge overlooking what appeared to be the bandit camp. Fires were lit across the valley below, and tents and makeshift cabins were erected in concentric circles around them. A shaky wall was erected around the entire camp, and an occasional guard patrolled the perimeter. Clearly, they weren't expecting any visitors anytime soon. Naruto would correct them. He continued straight over the ridge, approaching what appeared to be the camp's main entrance. Two guards were slouching on tree stumps, barely paying attention to what was going on around them until Naruto got close enough to smell the alcohol on their breaths. Hello there. One of the guards had clearly noticed the monk as he scrambled for his weapon, a dull, rusted-looking sword that had clearly seen better days. What exactly are you doing here? Become disoriented. The guard's yells had alerted his companion, who was reaching for his own weapon, a naginata, which was in better condition than the sword due to its shinier metal. Naruto said nothing, simply standing there, his face hidden by the shadows of his hood and his cloak flapping in the breeze. With his staff and dark cloak, he made an intimidating sight despite his small stature. Kaminari no Mai in Japanese. Naruto dug his shakuju into the soft earth with one sharp move, leaving it to stick out of the ground as he shifted into a loose taijutsu stance. His legs were shoulder-width apart, his arms dangling limply at his sides, and his head was tilted down, wet hair casting a shadow over his eyes. Naruto's head snapped up and his eyes opened, his ringed purple eyes glowing lightly with the chakra running through them. Both arms flipped up, palms cupped lightly, almost as if he was gesticulating towards the guards. Tenon Banshu. Before they knew what was going on, the guards were in the air, speeding towards the still motionless blonde. Before they got to him, his arms dropped, allowing them to come to a halt, still on their feet. It didn't last long. Naruto was between them in an instant, his body already spinning. Instead of punching, his arms appeared to move with his body's momentum, lashing out with pointed index and middle fingers. Naruto delivered a few quick jabs to nerve bundles across their bodies, and they were motionless on the floor. What have you done to us? The bandits were on the ground, various muscles across their bodies twitching in vain as they tried to move. His voice was hoarse, making it more difficult for him to speak than it should have been. Naruto walked past them without looking back, striding towards the camp. Kaminari no Mai is a taijutsu style that allows me to exploit an opponent's weaknesses. All of their blind spots and pressure points are visible to my eyes. As he walked past them, his eyes hardened, his cloak billowing in the rain. Keep an eye on my shakuju, I'll be back later. He moved past them, taking long strides into the camp. Kaneko was in a good mood that night, despite the fact that it had been raining since their raid on the town earlier. They had food on their plates and money in their pouches. He wondered why they weren't raiding towns every night if the reward was so great. He laughed as Teichi made a joke, spitting some food into the camp circle. The fire crackled brightly in their midst, casting a warm glow over the area. But then he felt something press against his neck and a few light jabs along his spine. He fell limply to the fire, unable to move, half his face covered in mud as he slumped to the ground. He noticed a cloaked figure move past him, descending on his fellow bandits with the grace of a dancer and the cold fury of a trained warrior. He'd disable everyone with just a few jabs along key points, spinning his body in strange and unpredictable directions until everyone was in the same situation as him. The figure came to a halt for a moment, rolling one of the bandits he had apprehended onto their back so they wouldn't drown in the mud. Kaneko just stood there in terror as the figure approached. All he could see in the shadows cast by his hood were a pair of glowing purple eyes, ringed around the small pupil. To the terrified bandit, it appeared as if death itself was striding towards his petrified form. The assailant grabbed the bandit's shirt and lifted him with surprising strength for his size and height. "Where do you house your detainees?" The voice that came out of the hood's shadows was calm but had a steely edge to it, and staring into those glowing eyes, the bandit felt compelled to tell him. There, I swear it was in the tents on the far side of the sea camp." Kaneko's eyes narrowed for a split second before he was thrown to the ground, his limp body splashing in the mud. The man sighed deeply, realizing how fortunate he was to be alive right now. Naruto walked calmly through the bandit camp, dispatching any bandits who crossed his path. He was only 11, but his chakra-enhanced speed and strength, combined with his Rinnegan eyes, made him more than a match for any number of untrained bandits. He dealt with the last of them quickly, his eyes cold and indifferent as he watched the man fall to the ground. Because of his master's teachings, he was able to forgive many things, but kidnapping people and ripping them away from their lives for the sake of money or sick pleasures was not one of them. He ducked into one of the camp's larger tents, only to have his hands clench into fists so tight that he began to draw blood with his fingernails. 20 women were bound at the wrists and ankles, their legs and arms tied to the ground. Most were asleep or unconscious, Naruto couldn't tell. Others were terrified and all had the telltale signs of crying or being abused in some way. He quickly untied the prisoners after calming himself down, in some cases simply slashing through their bonds with a chakra-coated hand. "You are now free. Go that way, the village is there." He pointed back in the direction he had come from, while the women just stared blankly at him. Suddenly, one of the girls in the back, about the same age as Naruto and with long purple hair, stood up and smiled. She wiped her tears away with her slightly shaky arms as she looked around at her fellow inmates. "You heard him, let's get going." That seemed to galvanize the women, as they all dashed from the tent, a few of them pausing outside to gaze at the bandits' immobile bodies strewn about. "Did you murder them?" As if to respond, one of the men at her feet groaned, causing the woman to shriek and lash out with her foot instinctively, knocking him out. "No, I've rendered them all immobile for about 6 hours. That should give the villagers enough time to come out here and deal with them as they see fit." Naruto smiled as he drew back his hood, unconcerned about the rain flattening his spiky blonde hair. "I'm sorry this happened to you, but you're now free." Naruto was suddenly surrounded by women on all sides, some thanking him profusely, others pulling him into vice-like hugs that left him a blushing wreck. One girl even kissed him before fleeing with her own blush after the fleeing women. When they were all gone, Naruto took another look around the bandit camp before walking away, grabbing his shakuju from the ground along the way. Once back on the road, he turned north and just started walking, a smile on his lips. Kawa no Kuni was a large country, at least when compared to other minor countries. While its economic income could not compete with that of its neighbor Konoha, it was far from impoverished. With a border spanning the lengths of Hai no Kuni and Kei's no Kuni, it had grown exponentially as a result of the peace between the two hidden villages. Trade routes were built across the country, and places like Takumi Village and the now decommissioned Tanagakure became popular tourist destinations. Its main export was lumber, which was similar to Hai no Kuni's except that instead of bulk and quantity, Kawa no Kuni provided professionalism and quality. Extensive lumber farms of rare and sought-after trees stretched across the country. Using the extensive river system that ran through the land, the lumber farms were able to float their cargo all the way to the port towns in the south of the country, where it was shipped off all over the elemental nations. Naruto stood by one such river, watching with amusement as large barges brimming with enormous logs of various colors and shapes floated by. Despite the fact that the country's hidden village had been officially disbanded in favor of services from either Konoha or Suna, there were many guilds of mercenaries operating in the land. Most of the time, they were tasked with defending the barges from attack. However, this was rarely necessary. One barge of wood, no matter how rare, was worthless to the average bandit. Naruto had been following the river for about an hour after he had left the women he had rescued to return to their village. It was still raining heavily, causing the river to swell slightly. However, there was little chance of the river breaking its banks, as most were reinforced against such events. Kawa no Kuni was a relatively flat land with only a few valleys to the south. By that point, the rivers that flowed from Iwa's mountains were lazy and meandering. There wasn't a single rapid or waterfall in the entire county. Floods used to be fairly common, which is why many villages still had flood protection measures in place, such as walls and special irrigation systems. However, in an effort to improve the country's economic situation, the previous daimyo implemented a plan in which every river in the country was converted into a sort of semi-canal. It nearly bankrupted the country, but the benefits were well worth it. Without having to pay so much for flood protection, people had more money to spend on other things, contributing more to the economy. Of course, Naruto had no idea as he strolled along the riverbank, his hood pulled up to keep the rain out. He would pause every now and then, an amused smile on his face, before continuing on his walk, the soft sound of raindrops and the lap of the river against its banks accompanying him. Did you ever get up the courage to come out? Naruto almost laughed as he heard a startled eep from behind him, 2 trees behind him. He turned as a young girl poked her head out from behind the large oak, her cheeks flushed from being caught. How long have you been aware? Naruto leaned against his staff with a small smile, surprising the girl when it didn't sink even an inch into the rain-softened ground. What? That you had been following me since the bandit camp. In retrospect, the girl should have figured it would be difficult to sneak up on someone capable of taking down an entire bandit camp without a single casualty. I wasn't trying to be sneaky or anything, I was just nervous. Naruto only kept a small smile on his face. How come you didn't return to the village with the others? He suddenly recognized the girl. She had rallied the others back in the camp. She had long purple hair that flowed down her back in a wave and bright turquoise eyes. The tattered remains of what was once probably a rather pretty dress covered her body in tears and dirt that was gradually being washed away by the rain. She began to wring her hands nervously before looking up with a hopeful expression. I'd like to learn how to do what you do. Naruto blinked in surprise before frowning as he noticed the girl's body shivering from time to time. He was wrapped up in his cloak, so he didn't notice, but the rain had made it rather cold. Here, before holding it out to her, he removed his long billowing cloak, revealing the monk robes he wore underneath. His hair was immediately flattened against his head, and his clothes began to soak, but he quickly circulated fire chakra throughout his body to keep warm. The girl only looked at the cloak hesitantly before accepting it with a gracious smile. Thank you, my name is Shizuku. Naruto raised an eyebrow. It was an unusual name, especially for a girl. Naruto, that's an odd name. The girl blushed once more as she pulled the large cloak over her much smaller frame. Yeah, the lady who ran the orphanage gave it to me. She looked up and saw Naruto's sympathetic expression, which only seemed to make her blush even more. I'm not sure what happened to my parents, but I was found unconscious in front of the village as a child. I don't remember anything before that. Naruto smiled sympathetically as he moved closer, bringing the two of them beneath the cover of a large bough. I, too, was an orphan who fled my village when I was young. He paused for a moment, as if about to say something else, but decided against it. I was discovered a few days later by my senpai Kairaku and have since lived in the Fire Temple. Shizuku's eyes widened in recognition as she noticed the boy's staff and robes. Are you really a monk? Naruto nodded once, and the girl leaned against the tree. Wow, I thought you were a ninja or something because of how you took down those bandits. For a brief moment, she stared at him, her long purple hair splaying across her face as it moved with the motion of her head. Aren't monks just supposed to go around preaching and praying? Naruto laughed briefly as he sat down on the wet ground. He was already wet, so a little more wouldn't hurt. That happens a lot. Monks and shinobi both develop chakra use within their bodies, but the difference is in their goals. Shinobi train solely to fight or assist in fighting in order to complete their missions and earn money. Monks learn to use chakra to better understand themselves. However, this requires both mental and physical training. Learning taijutsu is the most convenient way to do so. Shizuku nodded dumbly, only understanding half of what was said. However, the manner in which you apprehended those bandits. Naruto stood up and quickly walked up the tree they were next to, which was already incredible. He then ripped a large branch from the tree with apparent ease before dropping back down with no visible injury. Understanding chakra and learning to shape it provides certain benefits such as increased strength and speed, but this is only a byproduct of our training. In a fight with a trained ninja, the monk will almost always come out on top. Shizuku looked down, slightly disappointed. Naruto noticed this as he sat back down, this time with the girl. But why do you want to know what I'm capable of? The blonde was taken aback when he noticed the girl's teal eyes flash with intense determination. Her fists were slightly clenched as she gazed off into the trees, clearly thinking deeply about something. I felt helpless as I lay in that tent, unable to help or do anything. I had to watch as girls were dragged away, only to be abused for the sick pleasure of those men. I desperately wanted to help, to do more than just lie there hopelessly. Then you came along, framed by the light in the tent flap, looking so. She abruptly trailed off as a large blush flooded her face, forcing her to look away and cough. You appeared to be strong and powerful. She returned her gaze to him. I want to be like that so I never have to watch helplessly as people are hurt again. The blonde greeted her with a friendly smile. That is a compelling reason to seek power, but what happens next? What will you do once you have that kind of power? The girl looked at him, perplexed, as the blonde sighed, his usual serene smile replaced by a contemplative expression. My master once told me that some of the world's worst people do what they do because they love it. He only got a confused look this time. If you loved someone so much that you would give your life for them only to see them die in front of you, you would naturally seek vengeance. The road to damnation is paved with more than just good intentions, but also the bones of those who have died in their twisted quest. He blinked as he looked around, his warm smile returning as soon as he realized it had vanished. I'm sorry, I guess I got carried away there. Shizuku just stared at him with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open, almost comically. Do all monks look like you? Naruto chuckled, a grin spreading across his face. Nobody compares to me. The girl blinked before a similar smile spread across her features. Are you going to do it? The girl sighed as the blonde raised an eyebrow. Are you willing to teach me how to be stronger? Naruto chuckled and nodded understandingly, appearing pensive for a moment before slowly rising to his feet. He stood there for a long time, seemingly lost in thought, staring at the end of his staff. No, Shizuku nearly collapsed before looking down sadly. I see what you're saying. She turned to leave, shrugging off the cloak, but was stopped by a hand on her shoulder. Turning around, she noticed Naruto standing there with a half smile, and his other hand extended towards her. I can't teach you how to be stronger, that's something you have to figure out for yourself. But, as my master told me 4 years ago, I can tell you where to look for that answer. Naruto had never felt wiser in his life, almost like Chukaku when he delivered one of his wise lectures. Shizuku suddenly leapt forward, wrapping her arms tightly around the blonde in a warm hug, completely ruining the mood. Thank you very much. I guarantee you won't be sorry. I'll be the best student ever. Shizuku scrambled to catch up with Naruto as he resumed his walk. Does that make me your apprentice now? Naruto walked with a light chuckle, Shakuju jingling melodiously for a moment as he turned to face his new traveling companion. I guess so. The first thing you should know about chakra is that you cannot control it. For a brief moment, Naruto's new student looked at him incredulously. They'd stopped for the night somewhere in the country's north, not far from the border between Kawa and Aim no Kuni. They were sitting in a clearing, a small fire burning between them to keep them warm. The rain hadn't stopped, but the small clearing served as a natural shelter, keeping them mostly dry. What do you mean? Ninja don't use it for their cool jutsu and stuff. Naruto simply chuckled, running his hand through his damp hair before repositioning himself in front of the fire to stay warm. Using fire chakra was useful, but doing so repeatedly throughout the day became exhausting, even for Naruto. True, shinobi use chakra to perform ninjutsu, but they do not control the chakra running through their bodies. Rather, the most successful do. You have to think of it like water. You can pick it up all you want, but but it will eventually run through your fingers. Instead, you create channels for the water and allow it to flow naturally. A shinobi's only active role is to shape the chakra itself from their physical and spiritual energies. Shizuku's head was tilted to the side like a lost puppy at this point, causing Naruto to sigh with a small smile. "Please come here." The girl blinked but walked around the campfire to stand in front of Naruto. The blonde, on the other hand, surprised her by gently pressing his palm against her stomach, causing an intense blush to break out across her face. What exactly are you?" Shizuku came to a halt as she felt a warmth enter her body through the contact, spreading throughout her form like a liquid. She suddenly felt extremely powerful, and her senses were heightened to levels she had never imagined. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, Naruto pulling his hand away, much to the girl's dismay. "Chakra did that." Naruto's words did not seem to reach the girl, who wore a lopsided grin and swayed slightly. "Would you mind doing it again?" Naruto chuckled slightly as he patted the log next to him, the girl sitting down without hesitation. "I don't have to. You'll be able to do it yourself soon. I may have lied a little. You can control chakra to some extent, but not in the way you might think. Naturally, chakra flows in our bodies through special pathways designed for that purpose. Most people's pathways are underdeveloped, so not much flows. Ninjas work for years to develop these pathways so they can perform their techniques. I just guided some of my own chakra through your chakra network, slightly opening them up and encouraging your own core to begin producing more. This will set off a chain reaction in which your pathways will continue to expand as you train." Shizuku had her head tilted forward, her eyes slowly closing, when Naruto looked over. He simply smiled as he led her over to where he had unzipped his sleeping mat. He lay down on the ground a few meters away, not minding the soft earth as a bed. He had certainly slept on worse. He reasoned that it was better she slept now because manually loosening one's pathways was an unpleasant process, but she would sleep through it this way. He took another look at the sheet of purple hair poking out from beneath the blanket. If nothing else, he had gained some company. "So, where are we going?" After waking up some time after the sun had risen, the two were walking through dense forests once more. Shizuku had been awake since the sun broke through the trees, preparing breakfast before meditating until his new companion awoke. It was an unusual experience having to explain what meditation was and what it did to the girl. She had tried it briefly before but found it tedious. It was like seeing a flashback of himself. "I suppose wherever our feet take us." The violet looked at the blonde for a moment before sighing and shaking her head. "Will everything you say be a riddle?" Her response was a warm smile, which only made her groan louder. "Well, if we went through the elemental cycle, I started in High no Kuni before traveling to Kei's no Kuni, so Kaminari no Kuni is the next logical destination." The girl's disbelief only grew as she stared in horror at her companion. "Are you serious? The lightning land is on the other side of the continent." Naruto simply shrugged with that same calming, yet extremely irritating, smile. "Peace is a 1,000-mile journey that must be taken one step at a time." Shizuku blinked once more before lowering her head, an invisible rain cloud hanging over her head. "You're unfathomable." Of course, while the rain cloud above her head was fictitious, the ones in the sky were not. As far as Naruto could tell, the rain had not stopped all night and had continued into the morning. Naruto simply chuckled at her response as they walked in silence, only the jingle of his staff breaking the silence. "Where do you recommend we go?" Shizuku let out a small laugh of her own, her emotions completely out of control as she motioned to her tattered clothing. "A town, preferably, because if I'm going all the way to Kaminari no Kuni, I'll need some new clothes." Naruto gave a small conceding nod, pleasantly surprised by how quickly the girl's disposition had improved. It was something he had noticed about the girl. No matter what happened, she seemed to bounce back to her usual upbeat attitude within moments. They eventually arrived in a town that straddled the border with Aim no Kuni. Thankfully, it was not as desolate as the previous one Naruto had passed through. People were going about their daily lives as usual. Naruto preferred it this way because the traveling monk and the young girl with him received little attention. He didn't mind attracting attention because he was at least confident in his abilities. But now that he had someone with him, he couldn't be so sure. He was protective of Shizuku. It didn't take long for the girl to find a clothes shop thanks to the natural radar that all women have. Naruto gave her some money from his small savings from his time in Suna and left her to get what she needed. He wasn't sure why, but he had the feeling that if he went inside, he would be sorry. However, as soon as the girl returned, he realized he should have gone in with her. "Can you tell me what you're wearing?" Naruto blinked once in surprise, his head tilted to the side. Shizuku came out of the shop wearing what appeared to be a Miko outfit, complete with a clean white kimono top tucked into a traditional red hakama. She had also decided to follow in Naruto's footsteps, purchasing comfortable strap-up sandals with white socks instead of Ninja's open-toed style. Her hair was now tied back in a long ponytail with a light ribbon the same color as her eyes. Naruto wouldn't have been surprised if there was a sword on her back, but there wasn't. So you don't like it? I figured if I'm going to be traveling with a monk, I should dress the part. Naruto rubbed his brow, unsure whether to be flattered or irritated by the girl's commitment. Yet again, you're mistaking me for a priest. Shizuku just blinked, almost melting Naruto's annoyance with how cute the action was. I am. Shizuku tilted her head to the side with wide blinking eyes, her ponytail falling with it. And that was the final straw. Naruto could tell she knew exactly what she was doing, but it was too damn cute for him to care. It's fine as long as you buy something else afterwards. Shizuku appeared from behind her, producing 3 more sets of the exact same outfit. Shizuku had that same innocent smile on her face as he bowed his head in defeat. Come on, I'll show you how to encase those in scrolls. Shizuku's face lit up at the mention of learning something. On their walk, they had talked a lot about what Naruto would teach her. Or at least Shizuku had speculated excitedly while Naruto laughed. They began to move on, stopping in town for a bite to eat before continuing on to the border. Naruto was wary at this point. Aim no Kuni had recently become very mysterious, and Kairaku had even warned him against passing through there. The borders were apparently heavily patrolled, and Aimdecure itself was said to be impenetrable at the time. People speculated that there was some kind of internal strife going on, similar to a civil war, which was unexpected. Hanzo of the Salamander, the leader of AIM, was said to have defeated all 3 of Konoha's Sannin at the same time. Despite this, it took surprisingly little effort to enter the country itself. It turns out that most people ignored all kinds of holy men as they traveled from country to country, believing them to be harmless. Even if a monk or priest possessed great power or skill, they were pacifists by nature and posed no direct threat to anyone. There was also the fact that AIM was confident that Aimdecure had never been invaded outside of war. It continued to rain as they traveled, so they had to find a cave off the main road before setting up camp. Naruto quickly started a fire, and the 2 were soon drying off. Shizuku was also admiring her new look in a nearby puddle, but that wasn't important. Shizuku was surprisingly quiet given how talkative she was. After they had dried off, she sat at the mouth of the cave, staring out into the rain. After a while, Naruto joined her, sitting next to her and peering out into the sheets of falling water. Hasn't it been raining pretty heavily for a while now? When the blonde noticed his companion's head drooping slightly and an air of depression settling over her, he blinked. He had only attempted to strike up a conversation, but Shizuku seemed to withdraw into herself as he said it. I'm to blame. When he looked over, he was surprised to see Shizuku with tears in the corners of her eyes. Naruto was a monk, but he was still a guy. And there are only a few reactions a boy has when confronted with a crying girl. Wait a minute, it's not your fault. He began to wave his hands in front of himself for reasons he couldn't quite put his finger on. So what if it's raining? What do you expect from Aim no Kuni? Shizuku simply tucked her legs up against her chest, wrapping her arms around her knees and burying her face in her new Hakama leggings in response. It's not that. Rain seems to follow me everywhere I go. It's how I got my name. It has always rained whenever I have been outside for as long as I can remember. The other kids would avoid me, saying I was cursed or had bad luck. Now I've brought that on you, I apologize. She closed her eyes and listened to the individual sounds of raindrops falling on the ground outside. She didn't even look up when she felt a warm hand resting on her shoulder. A wise old man once told me that rain makes us realize how insignificant our own problems are. When you can walk outside while water falls from the sky, mingling with your tears to the point where they become indistinguishable, you realize that you are not the only person in the world crying, and you just can't see them. Shizuku rose slowly from her knees, timidly turning her gaze to Naruto. However, the blonde was staring out of the cave into the rain, not at her. He abruptly stood up and walked outside, completely unconcerned about the water drenching his body. Lightning flashed briefly behind him, illuminating his body for a split second. He turned, his hand outstretched in Shizuku's direction, motioning for her to join him. She stood tentatively and stepped out into the rain, her steps becoming more confident as she approached the blonde. He took her hand in his, smiling as he looked up at the overcast sky. As my first apprentice, Shizuku, I'll make you a promise. You'll never have to hide your tears in the rain again as long as I'm with you. He raised a single hand, his eyes opening, allowing Shizuku to see the Rinnegan for the first time. Through the contact of their hands, she felt a surge of unexplained energy. Shinra Tensei suddenly, the rain stopped, not completely, but the water was suspended in the air above the two of them, as if held back by some great invisible hand. Shizuku could only stare in awe at the physics-defying event above her, as Naruto defied nature to stop the rain. When she turned around, she found herself staring directly into Naruto's steely purple eyes. Suddenly, Naruto's technique failed, and the rain began to fall again, drenching them both from all the water that had been held back. Quickly returning to the cave, the two began to laugh at the situation before settling down next to the fire to dry off once more. Shizuku, on the other hand, would cast a glance Naruto's way every few moments or so, trying to explain what she had felt out there, looking into his eyes. Does that mean the rain has always followed you? Shizuku looked up to see Naruto staring at her, his eyes narrowed as usual and a small smile adoring his features. Shizuku simply nodded as Naruto became thoughtful, opening his eyes slightly wider to reveal his Daojutsu, and staring at her as if he could see right through her. His eyes narrowed in confusion for a brief moment before returning to normal. "I've never seen anything like your eyes." Naruto rubbed the back of his neck nervously as he chuckled. Shizuku appreciated those moments because they humanized the otherwise enigmatic monk she had become attached to. "I suppose you could say they're unique." Upon seeing Shizuku's interest, the blonde sighed before completely opening his eyes, abandoning his usual narrowed expression for the time being. "I have a bloodline of sorts that manifests in my eyes as the Rinnegan Daojutsu, which allows me to do things that others cannot." Shizuku simply stared at him strangely before her eyes widened in comprehension as she looked out the window at the rain. "Yes, the technique you saw me use was one of the 6 paths my eyes grant me access to, the Diva Path, which grants me limited gravity control." Shizuku was staring at him with wide, gleaming eyes at this point. She knew ninja were capable of amazing feats, but controlling one of the fundamental forces of the universe. "You've seen me use another, the Preta Path, which gives me control over how chakra moves, allowing me to absorb or direct it into objects or people. It was how I started manually opening your pathways. Aside from that, I'm not sure, and there isn't much information available to help me find out." Shizuku nodded in agreement before frowning. "How do you know there are 6 paths then?" Naruto grinned as he reached for his shakuju, taking comfort in the firmness of the staff. "I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to use all of the Rinnegan's abilities, but they always seem to appear when I'm in need or desperate." He shrugged, resuming his more casual demeanor. "But enough with the postponement. It's about time we worked on your chakra control." Shizuku's groan reverberated throughout the small cave. It was still raining, and Naruto was starting to take Shizuku's story seriously, though he wasn't sure if it had anything to do with them being in Aim no Kuni. It had been a long and exhausting journey through the country, mostly because they had avoided any villages or towns they came across. Following the first, they discovered that Aim was currently embroiled in a bloody civil war. Nobody said anything directly, but the signs were all there. Even in that one town, people had formed factions. There were those who supported Hanzo of the Salamander. These people were either terrified of the man and his followers or sincerely believed Aim's leader was the best choice for the country. Aim had been left in a state of poverty and disrepair after the Third Shinobi War, and Hanzo had worked tirelessly to restore the country to its former glory. Then there were the rebels, who were much more difficult to spot for obvious reasons, but their presence was not diminished. These were the people who thought Hanzo wasn't a good leader or that he wasn't moving fast enough. That wasn't what made Naruto nervous, it was seeing a particular woman. They were walking down the street in the first town they came across after purchasing some supplies when a woman passed them. Nobody did anything because she was wearing a black cloak with red clouds on it, a clear symbol of rebellion. People went out of their way to avoid the woman with the blue hair, and Naruto knew why. In comparison to the people around her, she practically radiated power. Even with Naruto's Rinnegan eye, he couldn't see anything, as a thin layer of chakra covered Gaara's entire body, making anything else difficult to discern. Following that, the two avoided any major villages or towns, not wanting to become embroiled in the brewing civil unrest. Naruto would have gladly offered his assistance, but people who became involved in wars were targeted. Naruto had made a promise to Shizuku that he would not break, he would protect her. As a result, they moved quickly north through the impoverished country. Naruto was relieved to finally see the Kyusa no Kuni border. Leaving the country proved to be far more difficult than entering. The two of them had been screened for contraband, which Naruto understood to mean any indications of rebel influence. It had taken an hour for them to be cleared to leave and cross into Kyusa no Kuni. Unfortunately for them, despite leaving the land of rain, The clouds above them did not dissipate. Shizuku's mood became gloomy as a result. Naruto had never put much stock in national borders. They were mostly made up and only really existed on maps. However, there was a distinct difference between AIM and Kyusa. They had barely left the relatively flat and barren country behind them when they found themselves walking through a large, jungle-like area. Everything, from the plants to the animals, appeared to be vastly oversized. Mushrooms the size of small buildings appeared to be especially common. This forced them to trek through the jungle with only a small map to guide them. Naruto had an innate sense of direction. He just instinctively knew which way was north and such. Along that line, the two had ditched the raincoats they had purchased in AIM in favor of lighter clothing. Naruto in his robes and Shizuku in her Miko outfit. But it would be a lot easier if there weren't all these bugs. A large and lazy-looking fly landed on Naruto's outstretched arm, as if to prove his point. The blonde was physically restrained from slamming his other hand down on it. The jingle of a monk's shakuju was designed to keep insects and bugs away from him so he wouldn't step on them. Unfortunately, they didn't seem to get the message. "I'm not sure what you mean." Shizuku's voice was calm, but she still had her hand across her mouth to keep her giggles at bay. Naruto had become increasingly irritable as they traveled deeper into Kyusa, a far cry from his usual serene monk persona. Naruto just gave her a sharp look, his eyes flashing with chakra to light up his Rinnegan. "How come this isn't happening to you?" The girl simply shrugged. She, too, had found it strange that not a single insect had approached her since arriving in the country. "I'm not sure, I guess animals just prefer me." Naruto simply gritted his teeth as he shook off yet another bloodsucker in search of its next free meal. He sighed irritably as he noticed the area around them darkening. No doubt the sun was setting, but they couldn't see it. "Okay, well, we might as well stop for the night." Shizuku froze, widening her eyes at Naruto before turning that same terrified gaze around her. "Here? What about in the middle of the jungle?" Naruto nodded absently as he began to unpack all of their supplies and equipment. "Are you serious? Did you notice how big some of the animals we passed were?" Naruto smiled as he continued to lay out the 2 sleeping mats they had. He had made sure to pick up a second one during their journey through AIM. "Don't worry, this is an excellent opportunity for me to experiment." For the time being, Shizuku's anxiety was replaced by curiosity, and she looked at her blonde companion with interest. "What?" Naruto only gave her a quick smile, which she deduced meant he was either planning something or wanted to keep it a surprise. He sat in his usual meditative posture and began to seep his chakra into the ground. Then, with all the control he could muster, he began to raise his arm, and the ground around them began to crumble, quickly replaced by fine golden sand. Much to Shizuku's surprise, the blonde raised his other hand up, as if obeying orders, and the sand began to move, circling the pair until it formed a makeshift hut. I'm not sure how Gaara did that with such ease. When he stood up, he was nearly tackled off his feet, only to have Shizuku run at him, grabbing his shoulders and staring at him with wide eyes. "That was fantastic. Can you teach me how to do that?" Naruto chuckled nervously and scratched the back of his head as he sat back down, Shizuku following him onto her knees. No, not really." The blonde's heart clenched slightly as she saw the girl's face fall. "Is that one of your Rinnegan talents?" Naruto quickly shook his head, eliciting a puzzled look from his female companion. "No, it's something I learned from a friend of mine, Gaara from Suna." Shizuku just frowned, poking at the makeshift hut's walls, which were surprisingly strong and unyielding. "So, if you can do it, why can't I? Do you think I'm not good enough?" Again, Naruto was confronted by a girl on the verge of tears, and his arms flailed out in front of him for no discernible reason. No, nothing like that. It's just complicated." He lowered his gaze slightly. It sounded like a rather pitiful excuse, and Shizuku seemed to agree. "What exactly do you mean by complicated?" Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He frowned and repeated this 3 times. He looked over at Shizuku, unsure whether he was ready to tell her about his tenant. However, the moment he looked at her, he remembered her sitting in the cave, rain pouring down in front of her as she curled in on herself. With a soft sigh, his eyes brightened slightly, and she returned her gaze. "Are you familiar with the Biju?" Wow. Shizuku just sat there, stunned by everything she had heard. If Naruto hadn't been so serious as he spoke, she might have thought it was a joke. "Are you okay?" Violet just nodded, her eyes wide as she tried to take it all in. It sounded fantastical. Her friend held the most powerful demon in the world, and now another one if his story was to be believed. "Yeah, there's just so much to take in." Naruto nodded sympathetically. Hearing the news had been shocking enough. The girl eventually seemed to snap out of it, looking around the sand hut with renewed awe. "So, Shukaku, you can do all of this with sand because of that second demon inside of you." Naruto quickly nodded, waving his hand to demonstrate a small pillar of sand that had grown between them. Can you teach me how to do that? Naruto chuckled nervously and scratched the back of his head as he sat back down, Shizuku following him onto her knees. No, not really. The blonde's heart clenched slightly as she saw the girl's face fall. Is that one of your Rinnegan talents? Naruto quickly shook his head, eliciting a puzzled look from his female companion. No, it's something I learned from a friend of mine, Gaara from Suna. Shizuku just frowned, poking at the makeshift hut's walls, which were surprisingly strong and unyielding. So, if you can do it, why can't I? Do you think I'm not good enough? Again, Naruto was confronted by a girl on the verge of tears, and his arms flailed out in front of him for no discernible reason. No, nothing like that, it's just complicated. He lowered his gaze slightly. It sounded like a rather pitiful excuse, and Shizuku seemed to agree. What exactly do you mean by complicated? Naruto opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He frowned and repeated this 3 times. He looked over at Shizuku, unsure whether he was ready to tell her about his tenant. However, the moment he looked at her, he remembered her sitting in the cave, rain pouring down in front of her as she curled in on herself. With a soft sigh, his eyes brightened slightly, and she returned her gaze. Are you familiar with the Biju? Wow. Shizuku just sat there, stunned by everything she had heard. If Naruto hadn't been so serious as he spoke, she might have thought it was a joke. Are you okay? Violet just nodded, her eyes wide as she tried to take it all in. It sounded fantastical. Her friend held the most powerful demon in the world, and now another one if his story was to be believed. Yeah, there's just so much to take in. Naruto nodded sympathetically. Hearing the news had been shocking enough. The girl eventually seemed to snap out of it, looking around the sand hut with renewed awe. So, Shukaku, you can do all of this with sand because of that second demon inside of you. Naruto quickly nodded, waving his hand to demonstrate a small pillar of sand that had grown between them. Yes, the previous host could do it as well, but to a greater extent and with much greater ease. Although this is likely due to the fact that he had his entire life to practice, it is still new to me. Also, calling them demons is probably incorrect. They are simply beings made entirely of chakra. The correct term would be Biju. Shizuku paused her odd gaze as she swiveled in place, raising an eyebrow at Naruto. What is a tailed beast? Isn't that just as bad? Naruto blinked at that before frowning. She did have a point, after all. Unfortunately, that is the only thing I can call them. Anything else and people would be confused. Shizuku sighed but nodded, and her hands began playing idly with the sand on the ground, drawing absent patterns with her fingers. I wonder what it would be like to be trapped inside someone simply because you are powerful and feared. It just sounds so unfair. I mean, they can think, right? No intelligent animal should be confined in such a way against their will. The blonde just looked at her for a moment, surprised but smiling. Well, the Kyuubi certainly doesn't make it easy to talk to it. Dealing with that fox is an uphill battle. Shizuku laughed. The thought of Naruto being so dismissive of such a powerful being made her laugh. Anyway, let's get started on your chakra exercises. Shizuku's laugh quickly turned into a long groan, and it was Naruto's turn to laugh. Those don't sound like the noises of the best student ever, says the teacher. He laughed again as she looked at him with a deadpan expression before slouching forward. But it's just so boring. Can't we do something different for a change, like learn how to manipulate fire or wind? Shizuku's gaze brightened as Naruto placed his finger under his chin and thought. No. Her head immediately dropped again, and Naruto swears the sounds of rain above them increased for a brief moment. You require chakra to do those things, and you have yet to locate yours. The blonde was taken aback when his friend's head shot up, a determined expression across her firm features as she drew herself into a relaxed cross-eyed pose. This time I'll do it. She closed her eyes, a look of intense concentration on her face, crinkling her brow as her tongue poked from the corner of her mouth. Naruto sat against the wall of his self-made hut, carefully watching the girl, noticing no change in her chakra. Shizuku's shoulders slumped forward after about 5 minutes, and she exhaled a long, drawn-out breath. How am I supposed to find my chakra when I don't even know what I'm looking for? Naruto sighed for a moment before raising his head with a hopeful smile. You must search deep within yourself for that tiny spark of warmth. You must lock onto it and concentrate hard, fanning that spark until it becomes a small flame. Shizuku was still depressed, and with reason. Naruto had already told her everything, and she still couldn't find what he was telling her to look for. For a brief moment, the blonde considered whether he was simply approaching the situation incorrectly. Tell you what, if you find your chakra tonight, I promise to teach you how to climb trees without using your hands tomorrow. Shizuku's head shot up, stars twinkling in her eyes as she remembered Naruto first introducing her to the concept of chakra. A determined expression crossed her face once more, but this time she tried to get into a proper meditative position, as she had seen Naruto do so many times. The blonde was mildly impressed, her posture was slightly off, but it was close. He got into the proper position, closing his eyes and allowing his mind to clear, deciding to get his own time in while he could. Father has returned. Naruto couldn't stop a small smile from breaking across his face as he heard Shukaku's ever-excitable voice break through the seal's calm. Silence, you pitiful tanuki, that mere ninja is not and will never be the sage, so be silent before I end your pathetic ramblings myself. Of course, Naruto immediately sighed as the Kyuubi's angry retort silenced the seal once more. It's also nice to see both of you. Since Shukaku was added to the seal, the Kyuubi had become much more irritable. As far as he knew, the two couldn't interact on a regular basis when Naruto wasn't in the seal. Their individual cells separated, or so he assumed from Kyuubi's dismissive remarks. However, Naruto came into the seal on a regular basis, and the fox's intense dislike for his fellow Biju was enough to make him nervous. Ninja, you're just as pitiful for never denying Shukaku's insane delusions. Naruto sighed once more. This was how it always went. He'd enter the seal, Shukaku would greet him, and the Kyuubi would make some scathing remark that would instantly enrage the tanuki. Not long after, Shukaku began angrily banging on the bars of its cage, thrashing its entire body against the reinforced metal. Brother, don't say that. Father will be furious at you. You will be punished. The Kyuubi simply grunted in annoyance before repositioning its massive head on its paws, ignoring the enraged cries of its fellow Biju. Aog, Fox, don't ignore me. He could only get a small twitch of the Kyuubi's ears, which caused the sand construct to let out another murderous cry. Naruto sat in the middle of the room, just watching as the Ikubai raged against the bars of its cage. Its ear twitched and it looked around, its gaze quickly settling on Naruto as it moved closer to the bars. Father should tell the fox and punish the fox. You must be father, you have father's eyes, father's staff, father's hair, and father's eyes, and I'm sure you have father's other possessions as well. Naruto blinked in surprise. He'd heard about the sage's legendary artifacts before, but he'd never been sure what they were. Between the Biju's insane attitude and almost sycophantic worship, he forgot that it, too, must have known the sage, just like the Kyuubi. Shukaku, please remind me of my possessions. Naruto noticed the Kyuubi open one eye and glare at him out of the corner of his eye. He was obviously offended that Naruto would impersonate the sage just to get answers, but there was nothing he could do. Shukaku, on the other hand, practically preened, pleased to be of assistance to the man he saw as his ancestor. Without a doubt, there was father's necklace, which was shiny and red. There were father's pots, which you warned us not to touch because father was nice and cared. Father had a sword as well, but he never used it to cut people, which Shukaku never understood. But father would pat Shukaku on the back when he asked. Also, there was. If Naruto wasn't so interested right now, the Biju's intense concentration would have amused him. In another situation, its great face's expression of happiness as realization dawned on it might have been amusing. The cord, that gold rope belonged to father. It nodded once in contentment as its massive tail swayed back and forth behind it. It looked down at Naruto with yellow eyes, anticipation on its sandy face before bending down. Naruto quickly walked over and scratched the enormous sand construct on the head, knowing what to do now. As it slumped onto one side, it let out a massive sigh that shook the bars of the cage slightly. Naruto almost expected its massive foot to twitch in delight, but it didn't. Naruto didn't think he'd be able to get that image out of his head. You did well, Shukaku. The great creature's contentment grew stronger before soft but still bone-shaking snores reverberated around the seal. How pitiful of you to use his insanity for your meaningless questions. Are you that depraved, Ninja? Naruto looked over and gave the great fox a small smile, his eyes twinkling with amusement. I have to use the resources that are available to me, even if their descriptions are vague. He looked up, not expecting a positive response to his question. Can you help me with that? The Kyuubi simply snorted, blowing a gust of warm air over the blonde and causing his robes to sway in the breeze. Why, don't you have your faithful lapdog now? Ninja, what use could I possibly be? Naruto sighed and slid down into a relaxed sitting position as he returned to the center of the chamber. My name remains Naruto. He swears he saw the great fox roll its slitted red eye at that moment, but it could have been a trick of the light. How exciting for you. Naruto could only sigh once more as the Kyuubi rebuked his attempts to engage the great creature in meaningful conversation. Just leave so I can get back to my lonely cell. It's better than listening to Tanuki snore. Naruto nodded and faded from the seal, allowing the Kyuubi to watch as the other cage vanished as well, returning him to his solitude. Naruto. As he heard his name called, the blonde's eyes shot open, searching frantically for the danger. What? What exactly is it? He blinked as he noticed Shizuku waving her hand in front of him a few inches away. She came to a halt when she noticed his eyes open, blushing and moving back when she realized how close they had been. You didn't answer the phone when I called. Naruto leaned back into a more comfortable position, accidentally nudging his staff as he repositioned his hands. I'm sorry, I was, talking to them. Shizuku's eyes widened briefly, but she quickly shook her head. I did it, Naruto. The blonde blinked in surprise before breaking into a fox-like grin. That's fantastic. Shizuku smiled, her eyes closed as she basked in the compliment. Yeah, I found that spark you were talking about back then. Just like when you showed me that warm feeling in my body. Shizuku felt incredible. Her senses were more alert than ever, and she felt as if she could run for miles without tiring. She could feel the new energy coursing through her body like small streams of warm water. You didn't tell me how amazing it felt. Naruto simply tilted his head slightly and smiled nostalgically. I wouldn't know. I've always had it because the Kyuubi was constantly dripping its chakra into my system. I don't know what it's like not to. As he looked over his companion, his smile faded to a confused frown, and a blush appeared on the bridge of his nose. Shizuku, did you go outside or what? The girl blinked in surprise as she looked out the hut before returning her gaze to the blonde. No, why? Naruto averted her gaze for a moment, her blush deepening as she moved. Your clothes and hair are dripping. The girl blinked once more before looking down. Her skin had a thin sheen of moisture on it, and her noticeably thin clothes were plastered against her body. Her eyes widened as she threw her arms over her chest. She was only 11, but she was already showing signs of maturing into a woman. What the hell is going on? Is this something that should happen? Naruto just ran through his thoughts, befuddled. He had never read anything about what was going on at the temple. I'm not sure, here let me. He trailed off as he opened his eyes, examining the girl with his Rinnegan. His blush rose slightly but quickly faded as he frowned. Hey, your chakra has shifted and is now flowing differently. Shizuka was still covering her chest as she moved closer to the fire to dry off. Oddly, the heat seemed more uncomfortable than usual. She looked up strangely at Naruto, wondering what he saw through those eyes of his. What exactly do you mean by different? Naruto simply peered closer, making the girl feel uneasy. It was as if he was looking through her rather than at her. I'm not sure, but your chakra used to be light blue, like most people's. They all appear slightly different, but only slightly. Yours now appears to be a much darker blue, and instead of flowing erratically, it appears to be moving more calmly like water. Naruto had nowhere near the vision of the Byakugan, so he couldn't perfectly see the movement of chakra through the pathways or tenketsu, but he could see enough to spot how it flowed and the color at least. What does that mean? Naruto finally sat back, allowing his eyes to narrow like usual, which was a small relief to Shizuku. He thought for a moment in silence as his friend continued to attempt to dry off by the fire, although it didn't seem to be working much to her distress. I have no idea. Maybe it has something to do with your elemental affinity. At this point Naruto could only speculate, while in Suna he had noticed slightly more difference in people's chakra that were ninja, especially Jounin. However, it had never been to the extent that Shizuku's had changed. In any case, we won't find out now. We should get some sleep. The girl smiled timidly but gave a firm nod. Right? A small smirk played over her lips for a moment as she lay down to sleep. And tomorrow you teach me how to wall walk. This is awesome. It was a few days after Shizuku had managed to unlock her chakra and they were still making their way steadily through the jungle. The only difference was that Shizuku now took every opportunity she could to walk up any tree, mushroom, or really anything vertical in sight. Naruto had thought it might grow tiresome to see her continually amazed by something that was so simple to most who learned to use chakra. On the contrary, it was rather refreshing to see her take such delight in such a small and trivial thing. Then again, he guessed to a civilian who had only lived an ordinary mundane life would find such things to be extraordinary. He was surprised by her quick uptake. She got the exercise down within 2 days and was able to securely stay on the trees even while still. Although on the first attempt she had nearly put her back out trying to keep her body horizontal, forcing Naruto to teach her how to channel chakra to other parts of her body to reinforce her back and legs. Luckily, once you could send chakra to your feet, anywhere else proved to be much easier. Be careful. His only response was the echo of Shizuku's laughter as she jumped from one branch to another. He hadn't been thrilled when she began hopping from tree to tree, but she seemed fairly apt at it, and he rationalized he would be there to catch her if she fell, so he allowed it. Suddenly she appeared by his side, dropping from a reasonable height but using chakra to both reinforce her legs and cushion the blow. Shizuku had been in relatively good spirits lately. Things were just looking up for her. The dense foliage meant that the rain couldn't reach them, something that was a rarity for her when she was outside. Plus she now had access to her chakra, which meant she felt full of life and energy, which only enhanced her now seemingly permanent bubbly attitude. The only strange thing was that every time she seemed to use chakra in large amounts she would get wet for no discernible reason. "It's fine, you don't have to worry." Her smile practically sparkled despite the lack of sunlight reaching them through the jungle canopy. "I have a great teacher after all, Naruto-sensei." The blonde gave a small sigh along with his customary smile. "Not you too, Shizuku." The purple-haired girl merely gave a beaming grin before running off again, under Naruto's careful watch of course. He was glad the various large and dangerous animals were staying away from the pair for some reason, but it never hurt to be a bit too cautious. As he watched her run he felt a sudden weight appear on his shakuju. Looking around he was surprised to see a small capuchin monkey sitting there, staring at him with curious brown eyes. The blonde and the monkey just stared at one another for a few moments before the small mammal chittered excitedly. "Hey, what the?" Suddenly the monkey raced across his arm, his little hands and feet tickling the monk as they clambered at his body. It paused around his neck for a moment, sniffing at the magatama bead hanging from his ear before blinking in rapid succession and chittering again. He took it in his hands, nibbling it briefly before climbing down Naruto's back, once again eliciting a few laughs from the blonde. It did a full rotation around his waist before looking up, chirping like a bird and jumping off. Naruto just smiled as he watched the excitable creature run off before frowning as he noticed he was a little lighter than usual. Glancing down, his eyes widened as he realized the scroll containing all of their supplies and camping equipment was missing. He looked up shocked, just to see the monkey's tail disappear around the side of a tree. Without even thinking he took off after it, using chakra to augment his movement. "Get back here." Shizuku saw and heard him run off, her eyebrows raised in confusion as she too took off after him, now somewhat able to keep up with the fast pace he set. However, as fast as Naruto was, the capuchin was far more maneuverable. It also knew the jungle better than him. The only thing that allowed Naruto to keep track of the quick little simian was his ability to see its chakra, even through the trees for a short distance. After leading them on a merry little chase where both Naruto and Shizuku were forced to dodge stray branches due to Naruto missing when he tried to use Banshu Tenon to capture the animal, the monkey finally stopped in a clearing. Naruto slowed to a stop, making very careful and deliberate movements towards the small black capuchin who was just standing there, occasionally nibbling on the end of the scroll with its small pointy teeth. Raising an arm, Naruto smirked. There was no way it would be able to dodge him this time. "Banshu, hey Naruto." The monkey's head whipped round, already chittering excitedly before it seemingly vanished into a pile of leaves. Naruto sighed as the monkey disappeared just as Shizuku jumped into the clearing. "Why did you run off like that?" Naruto turned to her, considering telling her off, but upon seeing her curious and innocent face he just didn't have the heart. "A monkey stole the scroll with all the food and supplies." The girl blinked incredulously at the strangeness of the situation before letting out a giggle behind her hand. "Well, did you catch it?" Naruto just wearily shook his head, absently pointing to the pile of leaves the monkey had disappeared into. "It ran off before I could grab it." He conveniently left out the fact that she was the one who alerted him to their presence in the first place. Shizuku just looked at him funnily before walking over to the pile of loose leaves. "Hey cool, there's a door here." Naruto blinked before looking around. Sure enough, Shizuku was holding up one side of a trapdoor, peering down into the darkness it hid. "Maybe the monkey went in here." Naruto just shrugged. It was possible. Shizuku smiled brightly at that before descending the steps. Naruto just looked at her like she was mad. "What are you doing?" Shizuku gave the blonde the exact same look as she continued to walk down the steps carefully. "What do you mean? We need those supplies, don't we?" She said it as if she weren't walking down into a completely unknown corridor in the middle of a jungle that had no discernible reason for being there. "Now are you coming or not?" With that her head vanished as she walked further down the stone flight of steps. Naruto stared at the spot for a moment before his eyes widened and he ran after her. "Hey, wait up." He caught up to her at the bottom of the stairs, peering into the inkai darkness with difficulty while Naruto's superior eyesight had little trouble. It was just a long corridor with a few branches splitting off seemingly at random. The walls all had the same crisscrossing wooden pattern that was dizzying to try and follow, while every so often there would be a small inlet with an unlit candle adorning the wall. Naruto walked up to the first one and channeled as much fire chakra into his hand as he could. A small flame appeared over his fingertip which he quickly transferred to the candle. Oh great, how are we supposed to find the monkey in this place? It looks like it goes on forever. Naruto just sighed at the girl. It was her idea in the first place to come down here. Don't worry, if we get close enough I'll be able to see its chakra, even through a few walls. Satisfied now, Shizuku beamed before confidently walking into the darkness of the underground compound. Neither one noticed as they passed over an otherwise unassuming piece of floor, only for it to moments later crack open a single dull, brown eye. What exactly is this place? Shizuku stared into the darkness beyond one of the many doorways that lined the corridors as Naruto lit another candle with pure fire chakra. I'm not sure, it appears abandoned. I read that much of the Third Shinobi War took place in Kyusa no Kuni. Perhaps it's a ninja base. Shizuku blinked, unable to create anything in the suffocating darkness beyond what Naruto had already lit. Wouldn't there be village symbols everywhere then? So far, everything has been the same wooden pattern and candle brackets. Naruto frowned as he moved to the next location on the wall, keeping an eye out for any chakra signatures in the area. For all he knew, the monkey had vanished along with the scroll, or it had simply abandoned it somewhere. While sealing scrolls did release some chakra, it wasn't enough for Naruto to see through walls. I don't believe shinobi would go around emblazoning their symbols all over the place, especially during a war. Shizuku looked around in perplexity as she exited the room, unable to glean anything from the oppressive darkness. Don't they wear those forehead protectors with the symbol of their village on them? Naruto nodded absently as he entered a room. Seeing only banks of old-looking computers and a few desks, he quickly exited. Why do they do it in the first place? Aren't they supposed to be cunning? Isn't having your village written on your forehead kind of counterproductive? Naruto sighed as the two continued their journey. He knew Shizuku was only talking because there wasn't much else she could do down here in the dark. I believe it's a matter of pride in your village, the place where you grew up and want to preserve. Shizuku walked slowly, their feet clapping against the earthen slabs beneath them, echoing down the corridors. But couldn't someone just steal the forehead protector from another village and frame them for something? Naruto smiled as he lit another of the seemingly hundreds of candles at the base. I'm sure someone has considered and attempted this in the past, and I'm sure someone has discovered ways to prevent it from happening again. Remember, if one village can do it, so can the rest. Shizuku nodded slowly once more, her lip pouting slightly in a cute way. You don't have to spell it out like I'm stupid. Naruto just chuckled as they walked on, his eyes methodically scanning the area for any sign of, well, anything. He smirked and raised his head in an exaggerated display of haughtiness, using his best sagely voice. A thing is never repeated too many times that is never sufficiently learned, my young student. Shizuku mumbled something under her breath as she crossed her arms under her chest and pouted once more. Another thing is that you should stop with the wise proverbs. It's actually Naruto's eyes widened in surprise as he leapt at the girl, tackling her to the ground around the waist just as a large slab of the floor flipped over. Shizuku would have been crushed beneath the weighty stone block if he hadn't moved sooner. Violet just stared at the spot, her breath coming out in short shallow gasps as Naruto quickly rose to his feet. Where have you gone? Come on out. The blonde was concerned because he had only sensed the attack moments before it occurred due to a trace amount of chakra leaking into the earth. Now, however, there was nothing to indicate the attack had occurred. The corridors were quiet, and Naruto couldn't even hear a whisper of chakra besides himself and Shizuku. Stay close to me, Shizuku. When he received no response, the blonde spun around, only to come face to face with a solid earth wall. Shizuku. The blonde pressed his hand against the wall, quickly drawing the chakra out of it before smashing his fist through it, shattering the now brittle earth. Unfortunately, all he could see beyond it was darkness. Shizuku was no longer there, and Naruto couldn't even see her chakra signature. Shizuku. All he heard was his own voice echoing off the wooden walls around him, mocking him with their common plea. As he slammed his shakuju down on the ground once, a growl rose in the blonde's throat, the sharp noise carrying all the way through the quiet bass. If necessary, I will raise this bass to get her back. Do you hear what I'm saying? As the rage-filled call reverberated around him, only his own voice greeted his ears. Oh my! Naruto whirled at the voice that sounded like it was whispering right into his ear, only to be met by a darkened corridor. Where have you gone? A dark but almost playful chuckling echoed all around the blonde, as if the walls themselves were speaking to him. But isn't that part of the fun of this little hide-and-seek game? Don't you realize? You infringed on Orochimaru property Samas and are now paying the price. Naruto quickly composed himself by taking a deep breath and focusing on his chakra rather than the voice that seemed to enjoy mocking him. Oh, you're ignoring me. That simply will not do. There was a brief pause as Naruto continued his search for the mystery speaker. Perhaps you'd be more inclined to indulge me if you knew what the game's prize was, Naruto could now tell that whoever was doing this was enjoying it almost sadistically. "Find me, little monk, find me if you can. I don't think your young friend has been here that long." As it spoke, the voice faded away, the last few words sounding like a whisper that was far too close for Naruto's comfort. In frustration, Naruto slammed his staff through the corner of a wall, finding satisfaction in the chunks of mortar and splinters of wood that now littered the ground. He quickly took another calming breath to stop his trembling fist before quickly forming his current limit of 5 shadow clones. However, as soon as they started running off into different corridors to cover more ground, large pillars of earth grew beneath them at astonishing rates. 3 of them were instantly dispelled into clouds of smoke after being crushed, while another was pinned to the ceiling by its arm. Naruto cursed, dispelling the remaining 2 as he dashed away, because his vision was split multiple ways. He lost some of his ability to see chakra, making it more difficult to predict the attacks. Even if the clones could cover more ground, they were useless if they couldn't get more than a few feet. What a mischievous little monk, cheating is strictly forbidden. Naruto had to physically restrain himself from responding to the mysterious voice, but he refused to do so. As he sprinted down another corridor, that same irritating musical voice laughed at him, sounding neither male nor female. The darkness was no problem. His eyes gave him enough vision to see where he was going. Tick tock, your friend's head is up for grabs." The voice cackled madly once more, but Naruto tried to ignore it, frantically searching for any chakra signature he could find. He finally found success when he rounded a corner and saw Shizuku bound by her wrists and ankles in the middle of the corridor. He slowed as he approached her, Shakuju raised defensively in front of him, his eyes narrowing. "Shizuku." Before they landed on Naruto, the girl blinked her eyes open tiredly. Suddenly she was alert as she struggled against her bonds, shouting muffled words against the gag in her mouth. Naruto dashed over, his staff still raised in a defensive posture as he unbound the girl. She rose to her feet, rubbing her aching wrists, before leaping onto Naruto and wrapping him in a warm hug. "I knew you'd show up, Naruto." The girl froze, her eyes wide with surprise, as she jerkily turned her head to see Naruto with his outstretched fingers just finishing applying precise pressure point attacks down her spine. And Naruto, as he took a step back from the now paralyzed girl, the blonde's hair cast a shadow over his eyes, Shakuju raised in front of him. Where has Shizuku gone? The girl couldn't move her body and just stared at Naruto with wide, tearing eyes. "What's going on?" And Naruto. The monk's head sank even lower as his fists clenched. Seeing Shizuku in that state hurt him. As his eyes narrowed, he strode forward, pressing his hand against her stomach. "If you don't tell me where she is, I'll drain you of chakra." The violet's terrified, timid expression vanished, replaced by a cruel smirk far too wide for her own face. Her neck swiveled awkwardly at impossible angles just to face the blonde, as her usual teal eyes faded into a dirty brown. How fascinating. The girl in front of Naruto's eyes had lost all natural color, her entire form taking on an earthy brown hue before crumbling away into dirt. "My duplicates are exact copies. There isn't a single flaw or strand of hair that isn't the same. How did you notice the difference?" Naruto shifted his weight to face the direction he thought the voice was coming from, only to be met with a grotesque sight. The ground in front of him bulged outwards, forming a loose, curvy pillar of mud that began to drip large chunks of mud onto the ground, where it was absorbed back into the floor. As more dirt fell away, a form emerged, that of a tall, lithe man dressed in a disheveled brown tunic and trousers with more dirt than fabric. However, his legs appeared fused together, still attached to the floor as if he were a stray root from some plant. Naruto could see his skin was surprisingly pale beneath his dirty mop of dark hair that fell around his face, covering one eye and falling most of the way down his back. The clone's one visible eye was the same dull brown as the clone's just before fading away into dust, gleaming with interest and a sickening glee. This was only emphasized by the man's unusually large grin, which threatened to split his face in two. "My, aren't you a fascinating little monk? I'm curious what else you can do." Naruto's eyes narrowed dangerously as he planted his staff firmly in the ground, adopting a shaky starting stance for the Kaminari no Mai. "I'll prove it to you, Banshu Tenin." The man's entire upper body lurched forward, as if pulled by some invisible robe, but he remained firmly rooted to the floor. Naruto took advantage of the opportunity to close the gap, lashing out with a solid finger strike to a nerve bundle that should have rendered the man paralyzed long enough for Naruto to complete the maneuver. However, where Naruto's fingers impacted the man, his body crumbled away like loosely packed dirt, much to Naruto's surprise. "Oh, that tickled me." The man's body suddenly extended grotesquely, resembling a snake, and quickly wrapped Naruto up like a boa constrictor. The man lowered his torso until he and his prey were at eye level. Yes, I believe there are many fascinating things to learn about you once you're on the operating table. Naruto simply grimaced as the pressure on his body increased as he was wrapped up even more tightly. And not it's going to happen, Shinra Tensei. He struggled for a moment before his eyes opened, one of the rings that surrounded his pupils contracting for a fraction of a second. An invisible wall of energy quickly expanded from the boy's body, powerful enough to completely blast the man's snake-like lower body into useless earth chunks. For a brief moment, he lay motionless, staring at Naruto with those same lifeless eyes that continued to sparkle with intrigue. Oh, I'll have to bring you to Orochimaru-sama himself. He'll want a good, long look at you. Naruto watched as his body melted into mud, quickly fusing with the floor until there was only a pair of bloodshot brown eyes staring at him out of the earth. Then they vanished. The blonde quickly grabbed his shakuju, leaning on it for support as he gasped for air. Being slowly squeezed until your bones creaked was not pleasant. He tried to comprehend what had just occurred. When the man moved into the floor, his chakra vanished completely, as if he were nothing more than actual mud. However, while choking him, it was all too obvious. Naruto couldn't understand how anyone could just vanish like that. It was strange, but he thought the man's chakra was brown. That in itself was strange. He tried to rationalize that it had to be a clone of some kind, but the more he thought about it, the more certain he was that it was the real man in the flesh, or mud. Worse, Naruto realized why it seemed so familiar. The man's chakra was different, just as Shizuku's was. However, instead of flowing like water through a stream, his chakra appeared sluggish, like liquid mud trickling down a hill. When Naruto was merging with the floor, he noticed his chakra stopped moving completely. Naruto saved that information for later, certain it would be useful in some way. But for now he needed to focus on getting Shizuku back. He continued to run through the halls, noting that the voice was noticeably absent, as well as that there appeared to be fewer options for where he could go. He found himself in a large open room that was already lit before he became frustrated enough to start blasting through some walls. After running through the dark tunnels for so long, the light hurt his eyes for a few moments, forcing him to cover them with his arm. His eyes widened in surprise as he lowered it. If the chakra signatures on the Shizuku copies were any indication, the room was full of them. They all felt more like extensions of that one man than normal clones, which irritated the blonde. As if he could be summoned with a thought, the man appeared on the ceiling, melting out of the roof to hang limply, resembling a root once more. All of the Shizuku copies turned to look at him, their teal eyes watering, before he could do much. Oh dear, so many little girls to choose from, and yet they're all fake. How sad. The man's body stretched down from the ceiling as he spoke, his torso rising to face the blonde with a sickening grin. Or do they? Naruto clenched his fist and raised his other hand, ready to blast the clones away if necessary. I'm not interested in your games, tell me where the real Shizuku is. The man quickly extended his hand, a playful grin on his twisted features. Naruto-kun, I wouldn't go launching one of those fancy gravity blasts. You see, Shizuku is somewhere in the room. You don't want to hurt her, do you? Didn't you promise her she wouldn't cry again? Naruto froze as he stared at the limp man, who simply grinned back as if he were seeing an old friend after a long time. How did you find out? And how did you get my name? The man let out a quiet chuckle that grew increasingly sinister as it progressed, suddenly dropping to the floor as his body splashed out like mud on the floor. As it congealed back into his body, his head swiveled on his neck, staring at the monk with piercing eyes. Oh, Naruto-kun, I know everything about you. Rinnegan, Shizuku, and even the special guests in your stomach. As the man reformed, the blonde took an unintentional step back, his legs still fused in that disturbing way. Orochimaru-sama saw fit to bestow upon me tremendous power in exchange for keeping this little out-of-the-way base safe for him. He gave me an unkillable body of mud and dirt by allowing me to become one with the earth. Not only that, but I can reach deep into your mind with a single brushstroke, bringing all your little secrets tumbling out. He smiled once more, his body expanding slightly as he was lifted higher into the air. Madara here, keeper of the Northwest Research Facility. How should we continue with our little game now? Naruto's eyes were shaded by his hair by this point, and his hands were clenched into fists that trembled slightly. I said, give me my friend back. There had been no forewarning, no subtle hints, no nothing. The next thing they knew, they were in a brightly lit room full of Shizuku clones, and everything had just exploded. When the dust settled, it revealed a thick layer of sand covering everything, with the majority of the duplicates having been broken down into sand grains. Madara was encased in a cocoon of fine golden grains, with only his head protruding. Do you believe an earthen trap can hold me? Have you heard anything I've said? The mudman came to a halt, his eyes widening in fear as his struggle became more visible. What are you up to? Naruto smiled briefly as he raised a second hand, concentrating all of his strength on the sand that bound the slippery man. Take a guess based on your knowledge of my abilities. As he attempted to change his body and escape the sand prison, the man growled angrily, his face distorting grotesquely. Tread his path, but how? As the sand began to constrict around Madara's body, Naruto chuckled slightly. You obviously didn't dig too deeply into my memories back then. The Preda path works against anything that comes into contact with my chakra, and this sand is saturated in it. His expression darkened as his glowing Rinnegan eyes pierced Madara as if he weren't even there. Tell me where Shizuku is now. Even if your body is immune to regular attacks, I'm sure it won't work if your chakra is depleted. As if to emphasize the point, the mud man began to feel dizzy from the rapid rate at which he was losing energy. You're going to hell, brat. As the blonde approached, the man tried to spit in Naruto's direction, but the sand constricted even more, causing him to gasp loudly. As he looked directly at Naruto, the man's mouth twitched up in a sickening grin. Crush me all you want. See if you ever get your little girl back. Naruto just kept his smile, which had returned to his usual calm expression. I've already stated that I'd raise this base to the ground before allowing her to be harmed. Is it true that you've seen my memories? The struggling man only growled once more before darkly laughing between strained breaths. Anyway, he casually jingled his shakuju, causing the man to look at the simple staff with fear. I don't need to crush you when I have this, right? Madara's eyes narrowed as Naruto raised the shakuju until the end of the staff was directly in front of the mud brow. Mans, this is your last chance. Madara of the Northwest Base, tell me where Shizuku is. Naruto's only response was another failed spit at him before his eyes narrowed and he tapped the end of the staff against the insignificant man's head. For a brief moment, there was the distinct sound of a gong ringing around the room, and when it passed, Madara tensed, his eyes glazing over slightly. Heh, do you think this is it, brat? Nobody is ever going to be able to defeat Orochimaru-sama. You'll eventually be laid down on a cold metal table, and he'll poke and prod at your eyes until nothing remains. As he spoke, the man's skin turned ashen, his hair falling out in clumps of mud as his body began to destabilize without the necessary chakra to hold it together. Just wait and see, Jinchuriki, you'll die someday, soon. As the last of the man melted away into a small brown puddle on the floor, Naruto narrowed his eyes. His attention was drawn away when he heard a deep gasp for air and a choking cough. When he looked around, he was surprised to see Shizuku held up by his sand in the exact position Madara had been in moments before. With a slightly queasy feeling, Naruto realized Madara had been holding Shizuku inside his body the entire time, which was why he couldn't sense her or see her chakra. He let the sand fall away, catching her as she stumbled to the ground, still taking deep breaths of fresh air. Are you all right, Shizuku? The purple-haired girl smiled weakly, her eyes closed as her head bobbed exhaustedly in his arms. He splattered mud all over my Miko outfit. Her voice was weak and croaky, but it managed to elicit a small laugh from Naruto. All right, let's go. He took her gently in his arms and drew her onto his back, where she gratefully wrapped her arms around his neck to hold on. Her head bobbed from side to side as they walked, and her eyes began to droop. But she remained alert. What exactly did you do to him? Her voice was quiet, which was unusual for her, and Naruto thought it was cute. As they made their way back through the base's winding passages, he just looked down thoughtfully. My shakuju has the power to permanently disable someone's ability to use chakra. He fell apart because his body couldn't hold itself together without it. Shizuku nodded tiredly as they approached the exit, snuggling her face into his neck slightly to get more comfortable, causing the monk to blush slightly. Is he gone? The blonde tensed at her words. His steps paused for a moment, the bright light of the outside world only a few steps away. No. With that, Naruto walked away from the base, his form silhouetted by the bright light from outside. Oh, there's the monkey. Naruto's eye twitched violently as he stared at the small capuchin monkey, who simply stared back, occasionally chittering and nibbling on the scroll it was still carrying. Shizuku simply waved sleepily at the small animal, which cocked its head slightly before repeating the action back to her, causing the sleepy girl to chuckle. He's adorable, can we keep him? Naruto was still partially frozen, his eye in excruciating spasm as his mind rebooted from the crash. How come he wasn't even in the base? Naruto's face had turned a virulent shade of red as he trembled in exhaustion and frustration. Shizuku quietly giggling into his ear, however, calmed him down and he settled for slumping down onto the ground. Shizuku finally took advantage of the opportunity to get off his back, lying down on the soft ground and closing her eyes to get some much-needed rest. The monkey scampered over to the pair, turning his head here and there as he took in the young blonde monk and his sleeping companion. He shrieked a few times before dropping the scroll and scurrying up Naruto's staff to perch there, ignoring the blonde for the time being as he began to pick insects out of his fur. Naruto only blinked at the strange sight before collapsing on his back and leaving the staff upright in the ground so as not to disturb the little capuchin. "You know, you really messed with us, little guy." The monkey gave him a brief glance, observed him, and quickly returned to its task. Naruto chuckled dryly as he raised his hand, bringing the sand up to form another makeshift hut. He noticed his arms were slightly burned from the large influx of Shukaku's chakra he had used inside the base, but he figured a good night's sleep would take care of that, as it usually did with everything else. As his eyes closed, he looked over to Shizuku, who was curling up around herself, pulling her thin clothes closer to her body. With a cautious sigh, the blonde rose and walked over to her, carefully draping his heavy cloak over her shivering form. The jungle can be very hot and humid during the day, but it can also be very cold at night. He sighed tiredly as the girl instinctively drew the cloak around herself, and a frown formed on his brow. "I almost lost her today. I wasn't strong enough to defend her at first. I need to start taking my responsibilities as her teacher more seriously. I'm going to start teaching her things that will protect her when I can't." With a sleepy nod of satisfaction, the blonde stepped back a little, grabbing a sleeping mat before collapsing on it and falling asleep almost as soon as his head hit the ground. "What is my elemental affinity?" They were once again making their way steadily through Kusa no Kuni, this time in an eastern direction on their way to Kaminari no Kuni, and Naruto nodded as he walked. "Yeah, we should get your affinity as soon as possible now that you have access to your chakra and have begun control exercises." Shizuku's eyes shone brightly. She had recovered well from the underground base incident, and was back to her usual cheerful self by the morning. However, this could have been due to the new traveling companion they had picked up. The little capuchin was currently riding on Naruto's shakuju, occasionally jangling the rings at the end of the staff. Shizuka had given him the affectionate name Masaru, though Naruto had no idea why. "Oh cool, then can you teach me amazing jutsu like breathing fire, or firing lightning bolts?" Shizuku was staring at him with stars in her eyes, making the blonde nervous. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly as he looked away, suddenly fascinated by the grain of his staff's wood. "Actually, the only jutsu I am familiar with is the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Everything else is a result of my Rinnegan or my new sand abilities." Her shoulders slumped as Naruto noticed the sound of rain increasing for a brief moment. However, it could have been his imagination. "However, once we find your affinity, I'm sure we can pick up some jutsu scrolls." Bubbly Shizuku was back, as if a switch had been flipped, looking at Naruto with renewed determination and glee. "Alright, so, how do we determine my affinity?" Naruto strode on confidently, noticing that the trees were starting to thin out slightly and that more rain was getting through the canopy, which was a good sign. "We'll need some chakra paper. Channel some into it and it will react differently depending on your affinity. Most people only have one, while those with limited bloodlines may have 2 or 3, and when most shinobi become jounin, they develop a second. Except that you can only see your second affinity on chakra paper after you've mastered your first, otherwise, the first takes precedence. You must practice to be able to control that specific elemental chakra." Shizuku nodded excitedly, glad to be learning something new again, even if the ability to walk up walls was still incredible. "Alright, where can we get chakra paper?" Naruto smirked, even as he pulled up his cloak's hood to protect himself from the rain, which was now pouring heavily. "Konohagakure no Sato, a few islands in Mizu no Kuni, and Takagakure no Sato and Tani no Kuni are the 3 elemental nations that produce it. Takagakure is conveniently located on our way to Kaminari no Kuni." Shizuku's eyes widened with delight that they were so close. Of course, this didn't last long as she, too, pulled up the hood of her cloak to keep the rain out. "Unfortunately, I don't know where Takagakure is." Shizuku almost tripped and fell over as a result of this, righting herself with a slight flush. She looked at Naruto strangely. The blonde simply sighed. "They're supposed to be extremely secretive. Even merchants are blindfolded and led through caves before entering the village. Kairaku-senpai had been there before. Apparently they get the paper from this massive tree in the village center." Shizuku blinked in bewilderment, partly to get water out of her eye as a raindrop fell down her face, but mostly in bewilderment. "Well, if merchants get there, it can't be that difficult to find." Naruto simply sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. He was about to use his shakuju to do so when he remembered Masaru. "I wouldn't be too sure. The village takes pride in never being invaded, not even once." The tree line finally broke, as if some divine being chose that moment to emphasize Naruto's point. The two preteens were standing on the edge of a large cliff with an incredible vista stretching out in front of them. Various valleys that appeared to be completely subsumed by forests spanned the landscape as far as the eye could see. Rivers flowed throughout the scene, with waterfalls strewn about from the numerous cliff faces. Shizuku was taken aback by the beautiful yet terrifying scene. Wow, I can see why now. Naruto, on the other hand, simply groaned, forced to rely on his staff for assistance. I'm still unable to see any roads.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.